The garage was my sanctuary, while the rest of the world saw a cluttered mess of circuit boards, soldering irons, and half-finished prototypes. I saw possibility. My name is Michael Chen, and for the past 5 years, I've spent every spare moment in this garage working on what my family lovingly called my bizarre obsession. Mike. My sister Sarah's voice cut through my concentration. Mom says dinner's ready, and please don't tell me you're still working on that thing. I carefully set down my soldering iron, looking at the device that had consumed thousands of hours of my life. It didn't look like much, just a small black box with a few blinking LEDs and a mess of wires. But I knew it could change everything. It's not just that thing, I replied, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. It's going to revolutionize how artificial intelligence processes natural language. The applications could be endless. Sarah rolled her eyes, a gesture I'd grown painfully familiar with. Right, just like your self-adjusting tennis racket was going to revolutionize sports, or that smart garden system that flooded Mom's prized petunias. I winced at the memories. Yes, I'd have my share of failures, but this was different. This time I knew I was onto something big. At the dinner table, my father barely looked up from his phone as I tried to explain my latest breakthrough. He was a successful software engineer at a major tech company, which somehow made his dismissal sting even more. Neural network optimization through quantum-inspired algorithms, I explained, pushing my rice around the plate. It could make AI language processing 1,000 times more efficient. Honey, my mother interrupted gently, maybe it's time to focus on something more practical. The community college is still accepting applications for their AIT program. I have a degree in computer science from Stanford, I reminded her. I'm not looking for a career change. I'm trying to create something revolutionary. A degree you're wasting in that garage, my father finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of years of disappointment. Your cousin Jerry just got promoted to senior developer at Amazon. He's buying a house in Seattle. Meanwhile, you're burning through your savings on what? A black box that supposedly talks to computers. I pushed my chair back, appetite gone. It doesn't talk to computers. It fundamentally changes how AI systems process and understand human language. The potential applications in everything from healthcare to education are. Enough. My father's hand slammed on the table, making the dishes rattle. You're 32 years old, Michael. When are you going to grow up and join the real world? I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. The real world is changing, Dad. Someone has to be crazy enough to push the boundaries, to try things that haven't been done before. And you think that someone is you? Sarah scoffed. The guy who couldn't even hold down a regular programming job. I left without responding, retreating to my garage sanctuary. They didn't understand. Couldn't understand. How could I explain that every failed prototype, every setback, every mockery-filled family dinner was just pushing me closer to a breakthrough? My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my tools again. The truth was, my savings were running dangerously low. I'd been living off my initial success, a small app I'd sold right out of college, but that money wouldn't last forever. The pressure to give up, to conform to their version of success, was mounting. But as I looked at my creation, watching the LEDs pulse with a steady rhythm, I knew I couldn't stop. Not now, not when I was so close. What my family didn't know was that I'd already achieved something unprecedented. The initial tests showed performance improvements that shouldn't have been possible according to current theoretical frameworks. I just needed more time, more resources, more. A notification popped up on my laptop. Another rejection email from a potential investor. This one hadn't even bothered with a meeting, just a form letter saying they weren't interested in speculative AI projects from independent developers. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling of my garage. Tomorrow, I had one last pitch meeting scheduled. A small tech investment firm I'd never heard of, probably another dead end. But I had to try, because if this didn't work, my father's words echoed in my head. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just wasting my life, chasing an impossible dream while the real world passed me by. I shook my head, pushing the doubt away. No, I knew what I had created. I knew what it could do. Someone just needed to give me a chance to prove it. Little did I know, that chance was coming sooner than I thought, and from a direction I never could have predicted. But first, I had to survive another day of being a family disappointment. The crazy inventor who couldn't let go of his dreams. I turned back to my work, losing myself in the familiar rhythm of coding and testing. Outside my garage sanctuary, the world might doubt me, mock me, dismiss me. But in here, surrounded by the pieces of my vision, I was building the future, even if I was the only one who could see it. The next morning, I straightened my tie in the mirror, trying to look like someone worth investing millions in. The suit I wore was the same one I bought for my cousin Jerry's wedding 3 years ago, the last time I needed to dress formally. It felt tight around the shoulders now, probably from all those hours hunched over my workbench. Another pitch meeting. My mother's voice carried a mix of concern and resignation. She stood in the doorway of the bathroom, watching me struggle with my tie. You know, the software company where your father works is always hiring. They have great benefits. A 401. Mom, I cut her off gently. I appreciate the thought, but this is different. This meeting today, I have a good feeling about it. She sighed, stepping forward to fix my crooked tie. You always have a good feeling, Michael. Remember last month? That venture capital firm in San Francisco. I did remember. The senior partner had actually laughed out loud when I explained my technology. Son, he'd said, wiping tears from his eyes, if what you're claiming was possible, Google or Microsoft would have done it already. You really think you've solved something in your garage that their entire research teams couldn't. But today was different. It had to be. The investment firm's office was in a modest building on the outskirts of Silicon Valley, not exactly the gleaming skyscraper I'd imagined. The receptionist directed me to a small conference room where a single person waited, a woman about my age, dressed in a sharp business suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Mr. Chen, she extended her hand. I'm Julia Hayes. Thank you for coming in today. I set up my laptop and the prototype, hands slightly shaking. Before I begin, I should mention that what you're about to see goes beyond current theoretical frameworks for AI language processing. I know it might seem. Show me, she interrupted, her expression unreadable. I took a deep breath and began the demonstration. As I explained the technical architecture, Julia's face remained impassive. But when I ran the first test, showing how my system could process and understand complex linguistic patterns thousands of times faster than existing solutions, something changed in her eyes. Run that again, she said quietly. I did. This time, I added a more complex language sample, something that would stump most AI systems. My prototype processed it flawlessly. Julia leaned forward, her professional detachment cracking slightly. How did you solve the contextual ambiguity problem? I blinked, surprised. Most investors' eyes glazed over when I got into technical details. You understand the underlying challenges? A small smile played at her lips. Mr. Chen, there's something you should know about this firm. We're not typical investors. We're actually a subsidiary of. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her eyes widened. I'm sorry, but we need to pause. Something's come up. She stood abruptly. Please wait here. Before I could respond, she was gone, leaving me alone in the conference room. Minutes ticked by. Through the glass walls, I could see people hurrying past, an unusual energy in their movements. What was going on? After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the door opened again. But it wasn't Julia who walked in. The man who entered was tall, slim, with silver hair and rimless glasses. He wore jeans and a simple black sweater, but something about his presence made me stand up automatically. He looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. Mr. Chen, he smiled, extending his hand. I apologize for the interruption. I'm Eric Schmidt. My knees went weak. Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, current technical advisor to Alphabet's board. When Julia sent me the preliminary data from your demonstration, I had to see for myself. He gestured to my prototype. Would you mind showing me exactly how your system handles semantic analysis? What followed was the most intense technical discussion of my life. Eric didn't just understand my technology, he grasped its implications instantly. Every question he asked showed a deep understanding of not just where AI was, but where it needed to go. The quantum-inspired processing architecture, he mused, examining my prototype. That's the key innovation, isn't it? But how did you overcome the coherence issues? I pulled up the technical specifications on my laptop, explaining the breakthrough that had come to me one sleepless night 6 months ago. Eric's eyes lit up. Brilliant, he whispered. Absolutely brilliant. He sat back, studying me with new intensity. Mr. Chen, what are your plans for this technology? I want to develop it further, I said. Scale it up, prove its potential in real-world applications. But I need funding, resources. Eric nodded slowly. What would you say to full access to Google's quantum computing resources, a dedicated research team, complete technical support? My heart started pounding. Are you saying? I'm saying we're very interested in acquiring your technology, Mr. Chen. Very interested indeed. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. When you say very interested, he wrote a number on a piece of paper and slid it across the table. I looked at it and forgot how to breathe. The number had 9 zeros after it. That's just the initial offer, Eric said quietly. We can discuss terms, of course. But we want to move quickly on this. Your breakthrough, it's exactly what we've been looking for. I stared at the number, my vision blurring slightly. It was more money than I'd ever imagined. More than enough to prove everyone wrong. To show my family that all those years in the garage hadn't been a waste. But something held me back from saying yes immediately. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the memory of all those nights working alone, believing in my vision when no one else did. I need to think about it, I heard myself say. Eric raised an eyebrow, but nodded. Of course. But please understand, Mr. Chen, you're not the only one working in this space. We're interested in your technology because you've solved a crucial problem. But others are close. I can give you 48 hours to decide. I gathered my prototype with trembling hands, barely remembering how I got out of the building. In my car, I sat staring at nothing, the piece of paper with a 90 number burning a hole in my pocket. My phone buzzed, a text from my sister. How'd the meeting go? Another bust? I started to type a response, then stopped. No, they needed to hear this in person. All of them. I started the car, my mind racing. Dinner at my parents' house was in a few hours. For once, I was actually looking forward to it. Sometimes success is the sweetest revenge.
I stood behind the counter of Alexandria Books, carefully restoring the spine of a first edition Hemingway. The morning light filtered through the dusty windows, casting a warm glow on the towering shelves that my grandfather had built by hand 50 years ago. The familiar scent of aged paper and leather bindings filled the air, a smell that meant home to me, even if my family thought it meant failure. The bell above the door chimed. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The sharp click of designer heels against hardwood floors announced my sister Vanessa's arrival before her voice did. "Oh good, you're actually open," she said, her tone dripping with the kind of practiced condescension that only came from years of looking down at others. "Mother was worried you might have finally given up on this." She glanced around, wrinkling her nose. Quaint little project. I carefully set down my tools and looked up. Vanessa stood in her perfectly tailored channel suit, diamond earrings catching the sunlight. Behind her, my brother Marcus leaned against a bookshelf, absently checking his Rolex. "The shareholders' meeting starts in an hour," Marcus said, not bothering to hide his impatience. "Father sent us to collect you. Though why he bothers including you in these things anymore is beyond me." I felt my jaw tighten. Hamilton Publishing, our family's company, had been the largest publishing house on the East Coast for 3 generations. My grandfather had built it from nothing, starting with this very bookstore. But somewhere along the way, the company had lost its soul, becoming more concerned with profit margins than the written word. "I'll pass," I said, returning to my work. "Some of us actually have to earn a living." Vanessa laughed, the sound echoing off the shelves. "Earn a living? Sophie, darling, you barely make enough to keep the lights on in this dusty old place." Meanwhile, the company's digital division alone brought in $400 million last quarter. I didn't respond. She wasn't wrong about the numbers. Alexandria Books barely broke even most months. But every time I thought about selling it, I remembered my grandfather's words. "Sophie, this store isn't just about selling books. It's about preserving stories, protecting the magic that lives between pages. Father's patience isn't endless, Marcus added, straightening his tie. The company's expanding into NFTs and digital rights management. The board wants to liquidate all physical assets, including this property. My head snapped up. This store isn't a company asset. Grandpa left it to me in his will. Yes, his one great mistake, Vanessa sighed. Leaving the company's birthplace to the only Hamilton who doesn't understand business. The building alone is worth millions in real estate value. I stood up, anger finally breaking through my practiced calm. Get out. Excuse me. Vanessa's perfectly shaped eyebrows shot up. I said get out. Both of you. Go to your meeting. Make your millions. But leave my store alone. Marcus pushed off from the shelf, shaking his head. Still the same stubborn Sophie. You know, this is why Father passed you over for CEO. No business sense, just foolish sentimentality. They left, the bell chiming mockingly behind them. Through the window, I watched them climb into Marcus's Ferrari, their laughter carrying through the glass. I waited until they'd driven away before letting my shoulders slump. The truth was, the store was struggling. Amazon and online retailers had changed everything. Most days, I saw more dust than customers. But this place held secrets my siblings couldn't understand. I locked the front door, flipping the sign to closed, and headed to the back room. This was my sanctuary, where my grandfather had spent his final years cataloging his personal collection. Books filled every available space, from floor to ceiling, some so old their titles had faded into illegibility. My fingers traced along the spines, until I reached the section I'd been avoiding for months. Grandpa's last project. The books he'd been examining before his stroke, still sitting exactly where he'd left them. Something about Marcus's threat felt different this time. Maybe it was time to finally go through these last few volumes, to finish what Grandpa had started. I pulled out the first book, a leather-bound tome with no title on its spine. As I opened it, a yellowed envelope slipped from between its pages, floating to the floor like an autumn leaf. My heart stopped when I saw the handwriting on the front. For Sophie, when the time is right. Love, Grandpa. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. The envelope contained more than just a letter. Several aged photographs slid out, along with what appeared to be a handwritten manuscript. My heart raced as I began reading my grandfather's familiar scrawl. My dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, it means they're finally trying to take the store from you. I knew this day would come. Your father and siblings never understood what we protected here. They think Alexandria Books is just a dusty old shop, a relic of the past. They couldn't be more wrong. What I'm about to tell you must remain secret until the right moment. I sank into Grandpa's old leather chair, documents spread across the reading desk. The more I read, the more my hands trembled. The manuscript wasn't just any old book. It was the original handwritten draft of The Lost Kingdom, the most mysterious work in publishing history. Written in 1923 by reclusive author Edmund Blake, the book had achieved near-mythical status. Only 100 copies were ever printed, and each one had vanished within a year of publication. Collectors worldwide had spent decades searching for even a single page. The story itself was said to contain coded messages leading to an immense fortune, but most people dismissed it as an urban legend. Yet here it was, the original manuscript in my grandfather's collection, along with Blake's personal notes and correspondence. My grandfather's letter explained everything. I found it in 1972, hidden in a false bottom of a trunk at an estate sale. Blake had no heirs, no family. He left clues scattered across his work, leading to something that could change everything. I've spent years trying to decode it, Sophie. The answer is in these pages, but I ran out of time. You're the only one who can finish what I started. You understand books the way I do, not as commodities, but as treasures. Your father and siblings would sell this to the highest bidder without a second thought. But you'll understand what to do with it. A knock at the store's front door jolted me from my reading. Through the window, I saw Oliver Chen, my best friend since college and now a rare book authenticator at Christie's. I quickly gathered the papers and locked them in Grandpa's safe before letting him in. Your sister called, he said, looking concerned. Said you had some kind of breakdown at the store. Are you okay? I laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. Did she call you as my friend or as a potential buyer for the building? Oliver had the grace to look embarrassed. Both, actually. Hamilton Publishing is serious this time, Sophie. They're preparing a hostile takeover of the property. They can't. The deed is in my name. They're claiming the store was never properly transferred out of company holdings. Your father has paperwork showing it's still a Hamilton Publishing asset. My blood ran cold. Forged documents. Would you put it past them? I glanced toward the back room where Grandpa's safe held what might be the most valuable literary discovery of the century. How long do I have? The court filing is set for Monday. 4 days. 4 days to decode a manuscript that my grandfather had spent decades studying. 4 days to uncover a secret that had remained hidden for almost a century. 4 days to save not just the bookstore, but perhaps my grandfather's legacy. I need your help, I said, leading Oliver to the back room. But first, you have to promise me something. What I'm about to show you stays between us. Not a word to anyone, especially not my family. Sophie, you're scaring me. I opened the safe, pulling out the manuscript. Oliver's eyes widened as he realized what he was looking at. Is that the original manuscript of The Lost Kingdom, the one that everyone thought was destroyed? Oliver sank into a chair, his professional composure cracking. Do you have any idea what this is worth? The auction value alone. It's not for sale. I cut him off. It's the key to something bigger. Grandpa left notes, clues. We need to figure out what Blake was hiding. For the next several hours, we pored over the manuscript and my grandfather's research. Blake's story on the surface was simple, a tale of a hidden civilization and its vast treasures. But certain words were written with slightly different spacing. Some letters had unusual flourishes, and scattered throughout were seemingly random numbers. It's a cipher, Oliver finally said, excitement creeping into his voice. Look at these sequences. They're not random. They're coordinates. I pulled up Google Maps on my phone while Oliver read out the numbers. The location that appeared made my heart skip. The Manhattan headquarters of Hamilton Publishing. The building wasn't built until 1950, I said, frowning. Blake died in 1925. How could he have known? Because, Oliver said slowly, Hamilton Publishing wasn't the first owner of that land. According to these notes, it used to be. A loud crash from the front of the store interrupted him. We froze, hearing footsteps and voices. Start boxing up everything, my sister's voice commanded. Father wants this place cleared out by morning. They were here, and they were early. I quickly shoved the manuscript and notes back into the safe, but not before taking a photo of the crucial pages with my phone. Oliver and I slipped out the back door just as Vanessa's voice got closer. Standing in the alley behind my store watching through the window as a team of workers began dismantling my grandfather's shelves, I made a decision. I wouldn't let them destroy everything he had built. Not when I was so close to understanding the truth. "Where are we going?" Oliver asked as I hailed a cab. "Hamilton Publishing," I replied, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "It's time to find out what Edmund Blake hid in my family's building." The taxi pulled away from the curb, and I watched my bookstore disappear from view. By tomorrow, it would be emptied, stripped bare by my own family. But if Blake's manuscript was right, what waited at Hamilton Publishing would change everything. I just had to solve the puzzle before my family discovered what I'd found. The Manhattan headquarters of Hamilton Publishing loomed above us in the fading evening light, its gleaming glass facade a stark contrast to my cozy bookstore. The irony wasn't lost on me. The building that symbolized my family's betrayal might also hold the key to saving everything my grandfather had built. "Your ID badge still work?" Oliver whispered as we approached the lobby. I pulled out the access card I'd never returned after being pushed out of the company. Only one way to find out. The security guard barely glanced up as we walked past, my outdated badge still granting access after all these years. The evening cleaning crew paid us no attention as we made our way to the executive floor, home to the company's historical records and my father's private office. According to Blake's manuscript and my grandfather's notes, the secret lay somewhere in the building's original foundation. The coordinates pointed to a specific spot, now buried beneath decades of renovations. "The old blueprints should be in the archive room," I said, leading Oliver down a quiet hallway. "If we can cross-reference them with Blake's numbers." "Sophie." I froze. My father's voice echoed from his office doorway. He stood there in his perfectly tailored suit, surprise quickly turning to cold anger on his face. "I thought I might find you here," he said, stepping into the hallway. "Though I admit, I expected you to wait until we'd finished clearing out that dustbin you call a store." "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking. "Those books, that building, they belong to me." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing belongs to you, Sophie. Everything you have exists because of this company. Your grandfather understood that in the end. Why do you think he left controlling interest to me?" "Because you threatened him," I shot back. "I found his letter, Dad. I know what you did." Something flickered across his face. Fear, maybe. But it was gone in an instant. "I don't know what you think you found, but Edmund Blake's original manuscript, I cut him off. The real reason you wanted the store so badly. You knew it was there, didn't you? That's why you've been trying to force me out." My father's face went pale. Behind me, Oliver shifted nervously. "Sophie," my father said, his voice dangerous now, "you need to be very careful about what you do next. That manuscript is company property. If you've removed it from the premises, it was never company property." I replied, "Blake didn't leave it to Hamilton Publishing. He left it to the owner of Alexandria Books, which was Grandpa, and is now me." "Where is it?" He stepped closer, all pretense of civility gone. "Safe, along with proof of how you forged documents to steal the store, how you threatened Grandpa when he wouldn't sell, and—" I pulled out my phone, showing him the photos I'd taken of Blake's coded pages. The real reason this building exists where it does. Something changed in my father's expression. For the first time in my life, I saw him look afraid. "You haven't decoded it," he said, but his voice wavered. "Haven't I?" I smiled, channeling some of my sister's practiced confidence. "The coordinates, the old property records, the original foundation plans. It all points to one thing. Blake's lost fortune isn't just a legend, and it's buried right under this building. That's impossible, he whispered. We surveyed every inch during construction. No, I corrected him. You surveyed what you could see, but Blake's codes point to something deeper. Something hidden in the bedrock itself. Something worth far more than this entire company. My father's hand twitched toward his phone. Security will be here in 2 minutes. Whatever you think you found is already in the hands of every major news outlet. I finished for him, along with evidence of your corporate fraud. So here's what's going to happen. The next hour passed in a blur of lawyers, documents, and barely concealed threats. By midnight, I walked out of Hamilton Publishing with full ownership of Alexandria Books restored to my name, along with a controlling interest in the company's physical bookstore division. My father kept his position as CEO, but we both knew his power was broken. The board wouldn't look kindly on his actions once the full story came out. I still can't believe it worked, Oliver said as we stood outside my store the next morning. The moving trucks were gone. Everything returned to its rightful place. But what about Blake's treasure? Was it really there under the building? I smiled, unlocking the store's front door. Come on, there's something I need to show you. In the back room, I opened my grandfather's safe and pulled out Blake's manuscript one last time. But instead of coordinates or coded messages, I showed Oliver what my grandfather had highlighted on the very last page. The greatest fortune a man can possess isn't gold or jewels, but the power of stories themselves. I leave this manuscript not as a map to hidden wealth, but as proof that words hold more value than any treasure. So there was never anything buried under Hamilton Publishing? Oliver asked, understanding dawning on his face. Just an elaborate bluff, I confirmed. One my father was too afraid to call, because he believed wealth had to mean money. He never understood what Grandpa tried to teach us, that real value isn't always about dollars and cents. I looked around at my store, at the shelves my grandfather built, at the books he'd loved, at the legacy he trusted me to protect. Besides, I added with a smile, who says we need buried treasure? This place, these books, they're worth more than anything my family could offer. The morning light streamed through the windows, dust motes dancing in the air like tiny stars. The store's bell chimed as our first customer of the day walked in. Welcome to Alexandria Books, I called out, feeling truly at home for the first time in years. Oliver squeezed my shoulder before heading out. Your grandfather would be proud, he said softly. I thought of my father in his glass tower, of my siblings in their luxury cars, of all their money and power and empty achievements. Then I looked at my little bookstore, filled with stories and memories and magic. They had never understood what real wealth looked like, but I did, and that was worth more than all their millions combined. Standing behind my counter, breathing in the familiar scent of aged paper and leather, I smiled. Sometimes the greatest victories don't come from finding hidden treasures or making millions. Sometimes they come from protecting what matters most, from standing your ground when the world tells you to give up, from knowing, deep in your heart, that some things are worth more than money could ever buy.
I can still hear the clinking of glasses and forced laughter from that Thanksgiving dinner. The crystal chandelier in my parents' dining room cast shadows across faces that hadn't bothered to visit my cafe in over 3 years, despite it being just 4 blocks away from the family's law firm. Emma, my sister Sophia's voice cut through the polite dinner conversation. Tell everyone your big news. I looked up from my plate, already knowing what was coming. Sophie sat there in her designer suit, diamond engagement ring catching the light as she reached for her wine glass. She had that look, the one that said she was about to remind everyone why she was the family's crown jewel. "I made senior partner," she announced, her smile dazzling. "Youngest in the firm's history." The table erupted in excitement. Mom practically glowed with pride. Dad raised his glass in a toast. "To Sophia Harrison, carrying on the Harrison and Associates legacy." I took a small sip of my wine, thinking about the stack of contracts waiting on my desk at home. But of course, nobody here knew about those. To them, I was just the family disappointment who played cafe owner instead of joining the prestigious family law firm. "And what about you, Emma?" Aunt Patricia turned to me with that familiar mix of pity and condescension. "Still running that little coffee shop." "The Wild Vine Cafe," I corrected her quietly. "Yes, I am. Still serving coffee." Sophia laughed, sharing a knowing look with our cousin Diana. "You know there's always a place for you at the firm if you want a real career." I stirred my mashed potatoes, remembering the meeting I'd had that morning with one of the city's biggest real estate developers. The contract I'd signed was worth more than Sophia's entire year's salary. But they didn't need to know that. Not yet. "The cafe does well enough," I said mildly. "Well enough to pay rent, I hope." Mom chimed in, concern etched on her face. "That downtown location must be expensive." I almost smiled. If they only knew I owned the entire building, and the one next to it, and most of that block. "I manage," I replied. Sophia launched into a story about her latest big case, some corporate merger worth millions. Our parents hung on every word, just like they had since we were kids. Sophia, the straightest student who followed the perfect path. Elite law school, prestigious clerkship, then straight into the family firm. And me? I was the rebel who chose culinary school over law school, who used my trust fund to buy a rundown cafe instead of a luxury condo. "I just wrapped up the Anderson acquisition," Sophia was saying. "You should have seen their legal team scrambling when I found the loophole in their contract. Mr. Chen was so impressed, he's bringing all of his business to our firm now." I kept my face carefully neutral at the mention of James Chen. If Sophia only knew who really controlled most of his real estate holdings. "I just don't understand," Mom said later, cornering me in the kitchen as I helped with dishes. "You're smart, Emma. You could have had everything Sophia has. Why waste your life serving coffee?" I dried a crystal wine glass, thinking about my morning schedule for tomorrow. "Not everyone wants to be a lawyer, Mom. But you're capable of so much more." She lowered her voice. "Look at your sister, designer clothes, luxury car, that gorgeous penthouse apartment. Don't you want that kind of success?" I thought about my own penthouse, the one I bought last month under one of my holding companies, the one with a better view than Sophia's. "I'm happy with my choices," I said simply. Mom shook her head. "I just worry about your future. The cafe business is so unstable. What happens when you want to start a family? How will you provide?" I bit back a laugh, thinking about my diverse investment portfolio and the string of properties I'd quietly acquired over the past 5 years. The cafe had just been the beginning, my front door into the world of downtown real estate. Later that night, as everyone gathered their coats to leave, Sophia cornered me by the door. "Hey, I meant what I said about the firm," she said, her voice carrying that elder sister authority she perfected since childhood. "Dad would create a position for you in a heartbeat. You could start in corporate law, maybe work your way up." "Thanks," I cut her off, "but I'm good where I am." She frowned, perfectly plucked eyebrows drawing together. "Emma, be serious. You can't serve lads forever. Don't you want to make something of yourself?" Oh, if she only knew. I made something of myself all right, something much bigger than anyone in this family suspected. Tomorrow morning would prove that. "I should go," I said, checking my watch. "Early morning at the cafe." "Right," Sophia smirked. "Those coffee beans won't grind themselves." I drove home to my real office, hidden in plain sight above the cafe. While my family thought I spent my days steaming milk and making change, I built an empire of my own. The cafe was just the public face, the piece of me they could see and mock. Behind it lay a web of real estate holdings, strategic investments, and carefully crafted contracts that would soon reshape downtown. Unlocking my office, I settled behind my desk and opened the file marked Chen Acquisitions. Tomorrow morning, James Chen would walk into my cafe, not as Sophia's client, but as my business partner. He'd been helping me buy up properties through various shell companies for years, keeping my identity hidden even from his own lawyers. including my sister. I pulled out the final contract, the one that would consolidate all my downtown holdings under a single management company. The one that would finally reveal who really controlled half of the city's most valuable real estate. My phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. Dinner was fun. Bill, Mr. Chen mentioned he might stop by your cafe tomorrow. Try not to embarrass me. He's our biggest client. I smiled, setting my phone aside without replying. Tomorrow would certainly be interesting. The contract was straightforward. My various holding companies would merge into a single entity, Harrison Capital Group. The name was a bit of family irony I couldn't resist. As I reviewed the paperwork one last time, I thought about my sister's smug smile at dinner, my mother's concerned lectures, my father's dismissive attitude toward my little coffee shop. They had no idea that while they were focused on law firm politics and courtroom drama, I'd been quietly building something far bigger. 5 years of careful planning, strategic acquisitions, and hidden ownership were about to pay off. Tomorrow, James Chen would sign the final papers, and my family would learn that the daughter they'd written off as a simple barista actually owned more of downtown than their precious law firm could ever dream of handling. The morning after Thanksgiving, I arrived at the Wild Vine Cafe earlier than usual. My manager, Kate, was already there, setting up for what she thought would be a normal day. The special meeting room is ready, she said, handing me a coffee. Though I still don't understand why Mr. Chen wants to meet in a cafe instead of his office. I smiled, taking a sip. Sometimes the best deals happen in unexpected places. At precisely 9 a.m., James Chen walked through the door. Despite being one of the city's most powerful real estate developers, he dressed simply in a black sweater and slacks. That was one thing I'd always appreciated about him. No pretense, just business. "Good morning, Ms. Harrison," he said warmly. Then, loudly enough for others to hear, "Could I get a vanilla latte?" I played along, heading behind the counter to make his drink personally. We perfected this routine over the years, me the humble cafe owner, him the casual customer. Nobody ever suspected we were orchestrating million-dollar deals over coffee. As I steamed the milk, the cafe's door chimed again. I looked up to see Sophia striding in, legal briefcase in hand. "Mr. Chen," she called out, clearly surprised to actually find him here. "I didn't expect to see you so early." James accepted his latte from me with a nod. "Ah, Miss Harrison, your sister makes the best vanilla latte in the city. Would you care to join our meeting?" Sophia blinked, glancing between us. "Meeting?" "Yes, regarding the downtown development project." He gestured to the private room at the back of the cafe. "Shall we?" I could see Sophia's mind racing, probably wondering why her biggest client was having a meeting in her sister's little coffee shop. Still, she followed us into the room, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. The room looked deceptively simple: comfortable chairs, a solid wooden table, warm lighting. Only the small camera in a corner, ready to record the signing, hinted at something more significant. "I'll need another witness," James said, pulling out a thick contract. "Perhaps your sister could join us." Sophia's perfect composure slipped slightly. "Emma?" "Oh no, she runs the cafe. She doesn't need to be involved in legal matters." James raised an eyebrow. "On the contrary, she's quite essential to this meeting." I sat down at the head of the table, enjoying the growing confusion on my sister's face. "Actually, Sophia, you're the one who doesn't need to be here. But since you are, you might as well witness something interesting." The door opened again, and my father walked in, followed by 2 other partners from Harrison and Associates. They must have been meeting nearby and seen Sophia enter. "What's going on here?" Dad demanded. "Sophia, why are you meeting with Mr. Chen in a cafe?" Before she could answer, James spoke up. "Actually, I invited everyone here. It seemed fitting to sign these papers where it all began." "Where what began?" Sophia asked. I opened my laptop, pulling up the presentation I prepared. The consolidation of Harrison Capital Group's downtown holdings, currently valued at just over $300 million. The room went silent. Dad's face paled as he looked at the screen, which showed a map of downtown with highlighted properties, blocks and blocks of prime real estate. "Harrison Capital Group," he whispered. "My company," I said calmly. "Though you might know some of its subsidiaries: Wild Vine Properties, Azure Development, Crown Point Investments." Sophia practically fell into her chair. "Those are Those are all the properties we've been handling contracts for. The ones owned by Mr. Chen's investment groups. Not exactly, James corrected her. Those properties belong to your sister. I've merely been helping her acquire them quietly over the years. That's impossible, Dad sputtered. Emma runs a cafe. She couldn't possibly. I pulled out my own copy of the contract. The cafe was just the beginning. When I bought this building 6 years ago, I saw an opportunity. Downtown was undervalued, fragmented. Nobody realized how much potential was being wasted. While you were all busy mocking my little coffee shop, I continued. I was meeting investors, analyzing property values, and slowly piecing together the largest private real estate portfolio in the city. Sophie grabbed the contract, her legal training kicking in as she scanned the documents. Her face went from skeptical to shocked to something close to awe. This is worth hundreds of millions, she whispered. You own half of downtown. More than half, actually, James added. Your sister has quite a talent for seeing value where others don't. Rather like buying a rundown cafe and turning it into the cornerstone of an empire. Dad sank into a chair, his face ashen. Why didn't you tell us? Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. You were also convinced I was wasting my potential. It was easier to let you think that while I built something on my own terms. But you serve coffee, Sophie stammered. You wear an apron. You? I wear many things, I cut her off. Sometimes an apron, sometimes a business suit. The difference is, I never needed everyone to see the suit to know my own worth. James pulled out his pen. Shall we make it official? I signed first, my signature bold and clear. James followed, then dated his signature with a flourish. Just like that, Harrison Capital Group became the largest consolidated private real estate holder in the city. Congratulations, James said, shaking my hand. Though I must say, I'll miss our early morning investment meetings disguised as coffee runs. The cafe's still here, I smiled. Though I might need to expand given how many lawyers might suddenly develop a taste for our lats. Later that evening, after the shock had worn off and the family had retreated to process this new reality, I sat in my office above the cafe. The city lights twinkled beyond my window, my city in many ways. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Can we talk? Over coffee, maybe? I looked down at my cafe, still bustling with evening customers. The place where everyone thought I was just scraping by, when in reality, I was building an empire one cup at a time. Sure, I texted back. I know a great little place downtown. I hear the owner's doing pretty well for herself. Sometimes success doesn't look like what others expect. Sometimes it wears an apron and serves coffee while quietly buying up the building next door. And sometimes the best revenge isn't proving others wrong. It's proving yourself right. I closed my laptop and headed downstairs. Tomorrow the newspapers would announce Harrison Capital Group's consolidation, and everyone would know the truth. But tonight, I had a cafe to run. After all, that's where the best deals happen, over a perfectly made cup of coffee, served by someone who knows exactly what they're worth. I always dreamed my wedding day would be perfect. Instead, it became the day I finally showed my family who I really was. But to understand what happened at that reception, you need to know how I got there. My name is Emma Chen, and I grew up in the shadow of my father's expectations. Harrison Chen wasn't just a successful businessman. He was a titan of industry who had built Chen Technologies from nothing into a multi-million-dollar empire. Every dinner conversation revolved around business strategies, market expansions, and the legacy he was building, a legacy I was apparently never good enough to be part of. Business is in our blood, he would say, looking proudly at my older brother Marcus. Well, most of our blood. That last part was always directed at me, along with a disapproving glance that made me feel about 2 inches tall. While Marcus followed perfectly in our father's footsteps, Wharton Business School, MBA, fast track to executive positions, I chose a different path. Computer engineering. My father's voice dripped with disdain when I announced my college major. Engineers work for people like us, Emma. They don't lead companies. But I saw something he didn't. While he was focused on old-school business models and traditional corporate structures, I recognized that the future belonged to those who could build it line by code line. I graduated at the top of my class, but my father didn't attend the ceremony. He was too busy attending Marcus's MBA graduation that same weekend. An actual achievement, he called it. For 3 years after college, I worked at various tech startups, learning everything I could about both the technical and business sides of the industry. My father saw it as aimless drifting. When are you going to get a real job? He would ask at every family gathering. Marcus is already a vice president at Chen Technologies. What he didn't know was that I was building something that would change everything. It started in my tiny apartment's spare bedroom. A revolutionary cybersecurity system that could adapt and evolve in real time to counter new threats. While Marcus was attending board meetings and playing golf with executives, I was coding until 3 a.m., fueled by coffee and determination. The first version of my security software caught the attention of a small venture capital firm. Their initial investment allowed me to hire 2 other engineers and rent a small office space. My mother, during one of her rare moments away from my father's influence, secretly helped me furnish it. "I don't understand what you're building," she admitted as we assembled cheap desks from IKEA, "but I've never seen you so passionate about anything." The next 2 years were a blur of coding, pitching to investors, and slowly building my company, Secure Core Technologies. We won our first major contract with a mid-sized bank, then another. Then a government agency quietly reached out about using our software. I kept my success quiet. At family dinners, I still played the role of the underachieving daughter. When my father bragged about Marcus's latest accomplishment, I would smile and push food around my plate. When relatives asked about my little computer job, I gave vague answers about doing okay. Then I met David. He was different from anyone I'd ever known. A brilliant architect who saw the world in terms of possibilities rather than limitations. He didn't care about my family's money or status. In fact, the first time we met, he had no idea who the Chens were. "You seem surprised," I said when he finally found out about my family. "I am," he admitted. "You're nothing like what I'd expect from a wealthy family's daughter. You're real." We fell in love over late-night conversations about design principles, technological innovation, and our dreams for the future. When he proposed a year later, I didn't hesitate to say yes. My father, of course, had opinions about that too. "An architect?" He scoffed during dinner. "Couldn't you at least find someone in finance or business? Someone with real potential?" I gripped my fork tightly. David is incredibly successful. His firm just won the contract for the new downtown development project. A glorified construction worker, my father waved dismissively. At least Marcus's wife comes from a good family. Her father's company is listed on the NYSE. I looked at Marcus's wife, Catherine, who sat there with her perfect makeup and society smile, and felt a wave of pity. She was exactly what our father wanted, a proper corporate wife who attended charity galas and knew which wines to serve at dinner parties. The wedding planning became a battlefield. My father insisted on turning it into a networking event, inviting business associates and potential clients. My mother tried to mediate but ultimately deferred to him, as she always did. Even Marcus pulled me aside one day at the office. "Just let Dad have his way," he advised. "You know how he gets. Besides, it's not like you're paying for it." But I was. Every cent of my wedding was being paid for by Secure Core's profits. Not that anyone knew that. What they also didn't know was that Secure Core had just gone public in a quiet but incredibly successful IPO. My ownership stake was worth $89 million, and that wasn't even the biggest secret I was keeping. 3 months before the wedding, I discovered something interesting during the routine security audit. Chen Technologies, my father's precious company, had serious vulnerabilities in their cybersecurity infrastructure. The kind of vulnerabilities that my software was designed to prevent. I could have warned them. Instead, I waited and watched through my networks as multiple small breaches occurred. Nothing damaging, I made sure of that, but enough to send their stock price dropping and create panic among the board members. Then, through a series of shell companies, I began buying shares. Lots of shares. The week before my wedding, I owned 22% of Chen Technologies. My father had no idea that his disappointing daughter was now one of his company's largest shareholders. The wedding day arrived sunny and perfect. The ceremony was beautiful, exactly as David and I had planned. But I knew the real show would be at the reception, when my father would give his toast. I sat at the head table, holding David's hand under the white tablecloth, watching my father stand up with his champagne glass. He was wearing his favorite Tom Ford suit, the one he saved for closing major deals. The room fell silent as he began to speak. Little did he know that in the next few minutes his entire world was about to turn upside down. My father stood at the microphone, champagne glass glinting under the reception hall's crystal chandeliers. 200 guests watched him, expecting the usual polished performance he gave at corporate events. But I could see something different in his eyes tonight, a coldness, an edge. When Emma was born, he began, his voice carrying across the silent room. I had such high hopes. The Chen family has a legacy of excellence in business. My father built his first company from nothing. I transformed it into an empire. And my son Marcus, he gestured to my brother, who sat smugly at his table, is carrying on that proud tradition. He paused, taking a sip of champagne. I felt David's hand tighten around mine. But Emma chose a different path. Against all our family's advice, she went into, he wrinkled his nose slightly, computer programming. A path for people who work for others, not leaders. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I saw David start to stand, but I squeezed his hand, holding him back. Not yet. And now she's married an architect. My father's lips curved in what might have looked like a smile to others. But I recognized it as a sneer. I suppose we should be grateful she's found someone who can at least design the buildings that real business leaders will work in. Catherine, Marcus's wife, let out a small laugh, quickly covered by her napkin. A few of my father's business associates chuckled politely. The truth is, my father continued, his voice hardening, some people just aren't meant for greatness. Emma will never amount to anything significant. She's been, and always will be, a disappointment to the Chen legacy. The room fell silent. Even those who had laughed looked uncomfortable now. My mother stared at her plate, hands twisted in her lap. Marcus couldn't quite hide his smirk. I stood up slowly, smoothing my wedding dress. Thank you for those heartfelt words, Dad. I have a few things to say too. I nodded to Michael, my chief technology officer, who had been posing as a photographer. He pressed a button on his laptop, and suddenly the large screens around the reception hall, the ones my father had insisted on having for his business presentation later, came to life. What is this? My father demanded, but his voice faltered as he saw what was displayed. On the screens were Secure Core's financial statements, stock prices, and most importantly, my ownership stake. $89 million in my name alone. You see, Dad, while you were busy grooming Marcus to run your company, I was building my home. Secure Core Technologies, perhaps you've heard of it. We're the ones who developed the adaptive cybersecurity system that's now used by most major banks and government agencies. My father's face had gone pale. Marcus was frantically typing on his phone, probably looking up Secure Core's public records. But that's not all. I continued, my voice steady. 3 months ago, we discovered some interesting vulnerabilities in Chen Technologies' security infrastructure, the kind that could devastate a company if exploited by the wrong people. Another nod to Michael, and new information appeared on the screens. Stock purchases, board meeting minutes, ownership percentages. I could have warned you, I said, walking around the table to stand directly in front of my father. Instead, I watched your stock price drop as minor breaches occurred. And then through various shell companies, I started buying shares. Understanding dawned in my father's eyes. No, he whispered. Yes, I smiled. As of this morning, I own 22% of Chen Technologies. And tomorrow when the market opens, I'll own even more because tonight, several board members will announce their retirement. Board members who, coincidentally, have all agreed to sell their shares to me. Marcus stood up so quickly he knocked over his champagne. You can't do this. Dad, she can't do this. Actually, I can. And I have. I turned to address the shocked guests. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that effective tomorrow, Secure Core Technologies will begin a merger with Chen Technologies. We'll be implementing our superior security systems, modernizing their outdated infrastructure, and bringing the company into the 21st century. My father finally found his voice. You planned this. You planned all of this. I learned from the best, Dad. Isn't this what you always taught us? Identify weaknesses, seize opportunities, never show your hand until you're ready to win. The room erupted in chaos. Business reporters who had come to cover the society wedding of the year were suddenly scrambling to report on the biggest tech merger story instead. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red, while Marcus looked like he might faint. I walked back to David, who was beaming with pride. He knew everything, of course. Had known for months. Ready to face the cameras, Mr. Chen? I asked. He grinned. Lead the way, Mrs. Chen Pierce, CEO of Secure Core Technologies. The aftermath was everything I expected and more. The merger made headlines across every business publication. Chen Technologies stock soared once investors learned of Secure Core's involvement. Marcus was quietly moved to a non-executive position, and my father had to adapt to a new reality. His first board meeting under my leadership was particularly memorable. This is the security upgrade proposal, I said, sliding documents across the table to him. I'll need your signature by the end of the day. He stared at me for a long moment, then picked up his pen. You really did it, he said quietly. You built something remarkable. Yes, I replied. I did. Without your help, without your approval, and without following your path. And that's what really bothers you, isn't it? He signed the papers without responding. As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. Your mother wants you to come to dinner on Sunday. I smiled. I'll be there. And Dad. This time, I'll give the toast. 1 year later, Chen Secure Core Technologies was valued at over $3 billion. My father still sits on the board, though now he listens more than he speaks. Marcus found his own path, starting a small consulting firm. Turns out he's better at advising businesses than running them. And my mother. She finally started speaking up at family dinners. David and I bought a penthouse overlooking the city, but we kept my old apartment where I built Secure Core's first prototype. Sometimes I go there to work late at night, remembering those early days when everyone thought I was wasting my time. The media loves to call it a revenge story, how the underestimated daughter took over her father's company, but it's really about something else. It's about building something on your own terms, about proving that success doesn't have to follow someone else's blueprint. Last week, my father actually asked for my advice about a new tech investment. You see things differently, he admitted. You see the future. I looked out at the city skyline from my office, the same office that used to be his. No, Dad, I said. I don't just see the future. I build it. And that's worth more than any inheritance he could have given me.